I know this is sudden, but I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?
Yes. Oh, yes.
The spring morning started like any other Tuesday in Riverside District. Natalie Morgan rushed down Patterson Street, her canvas tote bag stuffed with folders containing applications for her homeless shelter program. She had exactly 15 minutes to make it to City Hall before the committee meeting that would determine the future of Safe Haven House, the shelter she had poured her heart into for the past 5 years. Her phone buzzed with another text from her assistant. The city council had moved the meeting up by 30 minutes. Natalie picked up her pace, her worn sneakers slapping against the pavement as she dodged pedestrians and street vendors. Setting up their morning carts, the silver Phantom Julian Harrington sat behind the wheel of his silver Bentley Continental, his jaw tight with irritation. The morning conference call with his London investors had run long, making him late for his own board meeting at Harrington Towers. The 31-year-old developer had built his empire on precision and punctuality, and he despised being behind schedule. His phone rang through the car speakers. Another investor demanding updates. Julian pressed the accelerator, weaving through traffic with practiced ease. The world moved at his speed, or it got out of his way. The splash heard around the block the construction truck ahead moved too. Slowly for Julian's patience, he swerved around it, his Bentley's tires hitting a massive puddle left by the morning's street cleaning. A wave of muddy water erupted like a brown fountain, cascading over the sidewalk. Natalie saw the car coming, but had nowhere to go. The wall of dirty water hit her with shocking force, soaking her from head to toe. Her carefully prepared presentation folders slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the wet pavement. She stood there, dripping and stunned, watching the silver Bentley stop at the red light just ahead. Through the pristine window, she could see the driver, a man in an expensive suit, completely absorbed in his phone conversation, laughing at something. Utterly unaware of the disaster he had just caused, breaking point something inside, Natalie snapped. Not just from this moment, but from years of watching people like him glide through life while people like her fought for every small victory. She thought of the families at Safe Haven House, the children who would lose their beds if the city council cut her funding. She thought of the countless times she had been invisible to people who had everything. Natalie spotted a small stone near the curb. Her hand moved before her mind could stop it. She picked it up and marched toward the Bentley. The confrontation. Julian was finalizing terms on a $12 million property deal when he heard the sharp crack. He looked up to see a small dent in his car door and a soaking wet woman standing there with fury blazing in her brown eyes. He ended his call immediately and threw open his door, stepping out into the street. Traffic horns began blaring behind him. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Julian's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "This car costs more than most people make in 5 years." Natalie stood her ground, water dripping from her dark hair. "And do you have any idea what you just did? You drenched me and ruined my presentation. I have a meeting that could determine whether 30 families have a place to sleep tonight. But clearly, your car door is more important. You vandalized my property." Julian's perfectly styled hair fell slightly forward as he gestured at the dent. "That is a criminal offense. So is reckless driving and destroying someone's belongings." Natalie pointed at her scattered, ruined papers. "But I guess laws do not apply to people like you." The audience, a crowd had gathered. Phones were out, recording the standoff between the dripping woman in ordinary clothes and the immaculate businessman next to his luxury car. Someone muttered recognition. "That's Julian Harrington, the real estate guy. The one who wants to tear down the old theater." Julian felt heat creep up his neck. Public scenes were bad for business, bad for his image as a thoughtful developer who cared about community concerns. His marketing team worked hard to maintain that image. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice and pulling out his wallet. "How much for the dry cleaning?" "Consider it settled." Natalie's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I do not want your money. I want you to acknowledge that you were wrong. I want an apology. An apology." Julian repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language. "For accidentally hitting a puddle? For driving like you own the entire city? For not paying attention to anyone around you? For being exactly what is wrong with people who have too much money and too little awareness, the witness across the street. In the back of a black Mercedes, Catherine Harrington watched the entire exchange with growing interest. The 8-year-old matriarch of the Harrington family had been on her way to her weekly charity board meeting when the commotion caught her attention. She studied the young woman standing up to her grandson. There was fire in her eyes, but also something else: dignity, principle. Courage. Catherine leaned forward to her driver. Thomas, find out who that young woman is. I want her name, where she works. Everything about her by this afternoon, of course, Mrs. Harrington, Thomas replied, already making notes. Catherine settled back in her seat, a plan forming in her mind. Her grandson had become exactly what she had feared. Successful? Yes. Brilliant in business, certainly. But disconnected from the world beyond his boardrooms and luxury cars. He needed something to ground him, someone to challenge him. And this young woman, whoever she was, had just thrown a rock at his car. Catherine smiled. Perfect. The aftermath, the light changed. More horns blared. Julian realized they were blocking traffic and causing a scene. That would definitely make the evening news if he did not end this quickly. This is not over, he said tersely, getting back into his car. You are absolutely right about that. Natalie called after him, already pulling out her phone to photograph his license plate. Neither of them noticed Catherine's Mercedes pulling away from the curb. Nor could they imagine how thoroughly this encounter would change both their lives. Julian drove away, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The woman had actually damaged his car. He would have his lawyer send her a bill. Simple Natalie gathered her ruined papers, already late for her meeting. She had probably just assaulted a millionaire's vehicle. Her practical side screamed that she had made a terrible mistake. But the rest of her felt strangely satisfied. The investigation, by 3 p.m. Catherine Harrington had a complete file on Natalie Morgan. 29 years old, director of Safe Haven House, a homeless shelter, and community program. Graduated top of her class in social work. Devoted the past 5 years to helping families transition out of homelessness. Currently fighting city budget cuts that threatened to close her program. Catherine read through the details with growing approval. The girl had dedication, intelligence, and clearly was not motivated by money or status. She had stood up to Julian without knowing or caring about his wealth. Catherine picked up her phone and dialed her lawyer. Douglas, I need you to draft a contract. Something unconventional. Her plan was audacious, possibly crazy. But Catherine had not built a fortune by playing it safe. Her grandson needed saving from himself, and this Natalie Morgan might be exactly the person to do it. Besides, Catherine thought with a slight smile, if the girl was brave enough to throw a rock at a Bentley, she was brave enough for what came next. Natalie sat in her tiny office at Safe Haven House, staring at the rejection letter from the city council. Despite her impassioned presentation, delivered in borrowed clothes after her disastrous morning, they had voted to cut her funding by 60%. It was a death sentence for the program. She dropped her head into her hands, trying not to cry in front of the volunteers working outside her door. 30 families would need to find somewhere else to go. The after-school program for kids would close. 3 years of progress gone. A knock interrupted her despair. Carlos, her teenage volunteer coordinator, poked his head in. Miss Natalie, there is someone here to see you. She says it is about funding. Natalie looked up, hope flickering despite her better judgment. Send them in. She expected a city official or maybe a local donor. She was not prepared for the elegant elderly woman who entered. Leaning on a silver-handled cane, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Natalie's monthly rent, Miss Morgan. The woman extended a gloved hand. I am Catherine Harrington. I believe you had an unfortunate encounter with my grandson this morning. Natalie felt her stomach drop. The rock, the car. This was about the damage. She stood quickly, professional mask sliding into place despite her panic. Mrs. Harrington, I can explain about this morning. I was upset, and I should not have. ... Catherine raised her hand, cutting off the apology. Please call me Catherine. and I am not here about the car. In fact, I rather enjoyed watching someone finally stand up to Julian. He has needed that for quite some time." The proposal confused, Natalie gestured to the worn chair across from her desk. "Then what can I do for you?" Catherine settled into the chair with practiced grace. "It is what I can do for you, my dear. I understand the city council rejected your funding appeal this morning. News travels fast." Natalie tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I have connections on that committee." Catherine opened her designer handbag and withdrew a leather folder. Inside, you will find a proposal for a grant of $8 million to Safe Haven House. Fully funded for the next 10 years, Natalie stared at the document, the numbers swimming before her eyes. This was more money than she had dared dream about. With this funding, they could expand, help more families, create job training programs, maybe even buy the building instead of renting. This is incredibly generous. Natalie said slowly, "But there has to be a catch. Nobody gives away $8 million without expecting something in return." Catherine smiled approvingly. "Smart girl. Yes, there is a condition. A rather unusual one." The impossible condition. Natalie waited, her heart pounding. "I need you to marry my grandson." The words hung in the air like smoke. Natalie blinked, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me?" "Julian needs to be married before his 32nd birthday, which is 3 months away. Otherwise, control of Harrington Enterprises passes to his cousin, a thoroughly incompetent man who would destroy everything my late husband built." Catherine spoke as if discussing the weather. "You need funding for your shelter. I am proposing a business arrangement. This is insane." Natalie stood up, pacing her small office. "You want me to marry the man whose car I vandalized this morning? The man who drenched me and did not even apologize? We are complete strangers who cannot stand each other. Precisely why you are perfect." Catherine remained calm. Everyone else in Julian's life either fears him or wants his money. You, Miss Morgan, did neither. You treated him like an ordinary person who made a mistake. He needs someone real in his life, someone who will not let him get away with his worst tendencies. Natalie laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. People do not arrange marriages anymore. This is the 21st century. The arrangement would be temporary. 1 year, after that, you divorce quietly. The funding remains regardless of the marriage outcome. You help those families, expand your programs, change lives. All you have to do is play the role of my grandson's wife for 12 months. Weighing the impossible now, we sat back down, her mind racing. She thought of Maria, the single mother with 3 kids who had just found stable housing through their program. She thought of 10-year-old Joshua, whose grades had improved dramatically since joining their tutoring sessions. She thought of all the families they would have to turn away if the shelter closed. "Does your grandson know about this plan?" Natalie asked. "He is being informed this evening." Catherine checked her elegant watch. "In fact, you are both invited to dinner at my estate tomorrow night to discuss terms. 7 o'clock. I will send a car." "I have not agreed to anything," Natalie protested. "But you are considering it." Catherine stood, smoothing her skirt. "Otherwise you would have thrown me out by now." "The car will arrive at 6:30. Do dress nicely. Julian appreciates proper presentation, even if he does not deserve it." Catherine was at the door when Natalie called out. "Why me, really? You could find dozens of women who would marry him willingly for far less money." Catherine turned, her blue eyes sharp and knowing. "Because you threw a rock at his car, my dear. You saw a man behaving badly and held him accountable, regardless of who he was. That takes character. Julian has been surrounded by yes people for far too long. He needs someone who will challenge him. Whether either of you realizes it yet, the Harrington estate the next evening." Natalie sat in the back of the Mercedes that had picked her up from her apartment, trying not to wrinkle her best dress. It was a simple navy blue number she had bought for job interviews, modest and professional. Next to the luxury of the car's interior, she felt like a pretender. The Harrington estate took her breath away. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking the river, all stone and glass and old money. The driveway alone was longer than her entire street. Catherine greeted her at the entrance looking pleased. "Natalie, you look lovely." Come, Julian is already in the dining room. Fair warning, he is not pleased about this arrangement. That makes two of us, Natalie muttered. The dining room was absurdly grand, with a table that could seat 20 people. At one end sat Julian Harrington, looking somehow even more intimidating in casual evening wear than he had in his business suit. His dark eyes fixed on her the moment she entered. "The dinner confrontation, you," Julian said flatly. "Grandmother, please tell me this is some kind of elaborate joke." "No joke." Catherine took her seat at the head of the table, gesturing for Natalie to sit across from Julian. "Natalie Morgan, meet your future husband." "Julian, your future wife." Natalie and Julian spoke simultaneously. "We are not getting married." Catherine smiled serenely. "Then Julian loses the company, and Natalie's shelter closes. Quite simple, really. Shall we eat?" The first course arrived, some kind of fancy soup Natalie could not identify. She picked up the wrong spoon, caught herself, and used the correct one. Painfully aware of Julian watching her every move, "This is blackmail," Julian said, not touching his soup. "This is opportunity," Catherine corrected. "Natalie, tell my grandson about your work." Natalie set down her spoon. "I run a homeless shelter and community center. We help families transition to stable housing, provide job training, tutoring for kids, mental health support. The city cut our funding, so we are facing closure." "How noble," Julian said with undisguised sarcasm. "And you are willing to fake a marriage to keep your doors open." Finding her voice, Natalie felt anger flare. The same anger from yesterday morning. "Are you willing to fake a marriage to keep your company? At least I am doing it for people who actually need help, not just to maintain your control over a business empire." Julian's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you are talking about. Harrington Enterprises employs 12,000 people. If my cousin takes over, half of them will lose their jobs within a year. So we are both doing this for other people," Natalie shot back. "The difference is, I am honest about my motivations." Catherine watched the exchange like a tennis match, clearly enjoying herself. "You see, perfect chemistry. This is not chemistry." Julian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is mutual hostility." "Often the same thing, dear." Catherine remained unmoved. "Sit down. We need to discuss terms." Negotiating terms reluctantly, Julian sat. Natalie found her voice, channeling the confidence she used when advocating for her families at city council meetings. "If we are actually considering this insanity, I have conditions." Natalie pulled out a small notebook from her purse. 1. The funding is guaranteed, regardless of how the marriage ends. No strings, no oversight on how I run my programs. Agreed. Catherine said before Julian could object. 2. We maintain separate living spaces. I keep my apartment. This is a business arrangement, not a real marriage. Absolutely not. Julian leaned forward. "If we are going to convince anyone this marriage is legitimate, we need to live together. The media will be watching everything." Natalie felt her chest tighten. "Then separate rooms. Opposite ends of whatever mansion you live in?" "I can live with that," Julian conceded. 3, she continued. "In public, we act like a believable couple. No obvious hostility, no embarrassing each other. We present a united front fine, but that means you need to learn how to navigate my social circle," Julian said. "Charity, galas, business dinners, foundation events. Can you handle that?" Natalie met his challenging gaze. "I deal with city council members, grant committees, and bureaucrats every day. I think I can manage cocktail party small talk." "The agreement takes shape for," Natalie said. "This marriage stays strictly professional. No expectations beyond the public appearance." Julian laughed harshly. "Trust me, that will not be a problem." 5. After 1 year, we divorce quietly and go our separate ways. No drama, no complications. Catherine clapped her hands together. "Wonderful. I will have my lawyers draw up the contracts. The wedding will be in 3 weeks. 3 weeks?" Natalie and Julian spoke in unison again. "We do not have time to waste." Catherine stood, signaling the end of the discussion. Julian's birthday is in 3 months. We need time for you to establish yourselves as a couple before then. The engagement announcement will go out tomorrow, grandmother. Now Julian started to protest. The decision is made, Catherine said firmly. Unless you want to hand the company to your cousin and watch him destroy your father's legacy. And Natalie, unless you want to tell those families they need to find somewhere else to live, the reality sets in after dinner. Catherine excused herself, leaving Natalie and Julian alone in an uncomfortable silence. They stood on the mansion's terrace, the city lights twinkling below. This is completely insane, Natalie said quietly. On that, we agree, Julian replied. For what it is worth, I did not ask for this. Neither did I. Neither did I. Natalie turned to look at him. But I am going to do it. Those families need this shelter. The kids need those programs. I will do whatever it takes to keep them running. Julian studied her face in the dim light. You really care about them. They are not just statistics or tax write-offs, Natalie said. They are real people trying to rebuild their lives. Someone has to care. Something flickered in Julian's expression, too quick for Natalie to identify. My driver will take you home. We will need to meet this week to coordinate our story for the press, right? Our fake love story. Natalie could not keep the bitterness from her voice. Make it convincing, Julian said, because my grandmother is watching everything. And she is a lot sharper than she appears. As the Mercedes carried Natalie back to her tiny apartment, she stared at her phone. Tomorrow she would be engaged to Julian Harrington. In 3 weeks, she would be married. It was a business deal. Nothing more. So why did her hands shake as she unlocked her door? In his study, Julian poured himself a whiskey and stared at the contract his grandmother's lawyers had already prepared. His signature line waited at the bottom next to a space for Natalie Morgan's name. 1 year, he told himself. 1 year of pretending to be married to a woman who despised him. 1 year of maintaining appearances while running his company. Then freedom. He signed the contract with a sharp, angry stroke of his pen. Neither Julian nor Natalie slept well that night, both wondering what they had just agreed to, and whether some prices were simply too high to pay, even for the things they cared about most. The engagement announcement hit the media like a thunderclap. By morning, Natalie's phone was flooded with calls from reporters, distant relatives she barely remembered, and curiosity seekers. The headline on every news site read some variation of billionaire developer Julian Harrington engaged to social worker in whirlwind romance. Natalie sat in her office at Safe Haven House, staring at the photograph someone had taken of her and Julian on the terrace the night before. They had been standing apart, clearly tense, yet the photographer had captured a moment that looked almost intimate. Her assistant, Grace, knocked and entered with wide eyes. There are 5 news crews outside wanting interviews. What do I tell them? Before Natalie could answer, her phone rang. Julian's name flashed on the screen. Do not talk to any reporters, he said without greeting. My PR team is handling everything. There is a car coming to pick you up in 20 minutes. We need to get our story straight before this gets worse. Good morning to you too, Natalie replied sarcastically. And it is my shelter. I can talk to whoever I want. Not if you want this arrangement to work. Julian's voice was sharp. 20 minutes. Be ready. Creating the fairy tale Julian's penthouse overlooked the entire city. All floor 2 ceiling windows and modern minimalist design. Natalie felt completely out of place among the sleek furniture and expensive art. A woman in her 40s with perfectly styled hair and a tablet waited in the living room. This is Victoria Chen, my head of public relations, Julian said. She is going to coach us on our story. Victoria smiled professionally. Congratulations on your engagement. Now let us make sure everyone believes it. For the next 3 hours, Victoria grilled them on details. How did they meet? What was their first date? When did Julian propose? Every answer had to be consistent, believable, romantic enough to satisfy the public, but not so elaborate that they would forget the details. We are saying you met 6 months ago at a charity event, Victoria explained. Julian was immediately drawn to your passion for helping others. You were reluctant at first because of your different backgrounds. But his persistence, and genuine interest in your work won you over. That is laying it on thick." Natalie muttered. "It is called building a narrative," Victoria replied smoothly. "The proposal happened last weekend during a private dinner. Julian, you surprised her with a family heirloom ring." Julian pulled a velvet box from his pocket and handed it to Natalie. His grandmother had sent it over that morning. Inside was a stunning diamond ring. It's clearly antique and worth more than Natalie's car. "I cannot wear this," Natalie said, staring at the ring. "What if I lose it?" "Then you lose it," Julian said flatly. "It is just a ring. It is a 3-carat diamond from 1920, Victoria corrected. "Try not to lose it." The first public appearance that evening, Julian and Natalie attended their first event as an engaged couple. The Riverside Children's Foundation Gala was exactly the kind of high society affair Natalie had always avoided. Women in designer gowns, men in custom tuxedos. Champagne flowing freely. Catherine had insisted on taking Natalie shopping that afternoon. The emerald green gown she now wore probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. She felt like an imposter, playing dress-up in someone else's life. "Remember," Julian said quietly as they entered the ballroom, "we are in love. Try to look like you do not want to strangle me. I will do my best," Natalie replied through a forced smile. "You try to look like you are capable of human emotion." Despite their mutual hostility, they played their parts well. Julian's hand rested on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. He introduced her to business associates and society figures, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. Natalie found herself watching him work the room. He was charming when he wanted to be, she realized. He remembered names, asked about people's families, made everyone feel important. It was a performance, carefully calculated, but effective. An unexpected moment during dinner, an older woman approached their table. "Julian Harrington, I heard you were engaged." "Let me see this girl who finally caught you, Mrs. Patterson." Julian stood respectfully. "This is my fiancée, Natalie Morgan." Natalie. Mrs. Patterson sits on the board of several foundations in the city. The older woman studied Natalie with sharp eyes. "Morgan, are you related to the Safe Haven House?" "I run it," Natalie said, finding solid ground. "We provide transitional housing and support services for families experiencing homelessness." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "My daughter volunteers there. She says you changed her life, gave her purpose. Thank you for the work you do." After Mrs. Patterson left, Julian looked at Natalie with something like surprise. "You really have made an impact. That is what happens when you care about more than profit margins," Natalie said, but her tone was less sharp than usual. The moment was interrupted by a man approaching their table. "Cousin Julian," he said, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Congratulations on your sudden engagement, Trevor." Julian's voice cooled noticeably. "Natalie, this is my cousin, Trevor Harrington." Trevor's gaze swept over Natalie with obvious calculation. "How romantic. A whirlwind courtship. I am sure it has nothing to do with grandfather's will." Natalie felt Julian tense beside her. "Actually," she said smoothly, "it has everything to do with finding someone who makes you want to be better. Maybe you should try it sometime." Trevor's smile faltered. Julian squeezed her hand under the table, whether in warning or gratitude, she could not tell. Moving in together the following week, Natalie moved into Julian's downtown penthouse. She brought only 2 suitcases and a box of books, her entire life fitting into the corner of his massive walk-in closet. "Your room is down the hall," Julian said, gesturing vaguely. "The housekeeper comes on Tuesdays and Fridays. My schedule is on the kitchen tablet. Try not to disrupt it." Natalie looked around the sterile guest room. It was beautiful but impersonal, like a luxury hotel. This is temporary, she reminded herself. 1 year, she could survive anything for 1 year. The first few days were awkward. They moved around each other like strangers, careful not to invade each other's space. Julian left early for work and came home late. Natalie spent her days at the shelter, returning to the penthouse only to sleep. But slowly, unexpectedly, patterns emerged. Natalie woke early one Saturday morning to find Julian in the kitchen, cooking breakfast. He stood at the stove in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his usually perfect hair messy flipping pancakes. I didn't know you could cook, she said from the doorway. Julian turned, startled. He looked younger somehow, more human without his usual armor of expensive suits and calculated confidence. My mother taught me. Before she passed away, there was something in his voice, a crack in the facade. Natalie moved closer, drawn by curiosity. When did she die? Natalie asked gently. When I was 15. Julian plated the pancakes with careful precision. My father threw himself into work after that. I guess I learned from his example. Is that why you're so driven? Why the company matters so much? Julian was quiet for a moment. The company was my father's life. When he died 3 years ago, I promised myself I would not let anyone destroy what he built. Not Trevor, not anyone. For the first time, Natalie saw Julian as more than just an arrogant millionaire. She saw a son trying to honor his parents, carrying the weight of their legacy. A week later, Julian came home early to find Natalie on the terrace, crying. She tried to hide it, wiping her face quickly, but he had already seen. It happened, he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. Nothing, just a hard day at work. Julian sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. We may be faking this marriage, but you can talk to me. The kindness in his voice broke something open inside her. One of our families, Maria and her kids, they finally got approved for permanent housing. They're moving into their own apartment next week. That's good news, Julian said, confused. It is. Natalie smiled through her tears. It just reminded me of my own family. We were homeless when I was 12. My dad lost his job. We lost our house. We lived in our car for 8 months. Julian sat very still, listening. A shelter took us in finally. They helped my dad find work, helped my mom get training. They saved us. That's why I do this work. Because I know what it feels like to have nowhere to go, to wonder if you'll ever feel safe again. I didn't know, Julian said quietly. Why would you? Natalie laughed softly. We're just a business arrangement, right? But something had shifted between them. Julian reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. For what it's worth, those families are lucky to have you fighting for them. Catherine invited them both to Sunday brunch at the mansion. Over eggs and perfectly brewed coffee, she watched her grandson and Natalie with satisfaction. You two are doing well with the public appearances, Catherine said. The media loves your story. But I hope you're also getting to know each other. We're managing, Julian said carefully. Managing is not living, Catherine replied. Natalie, have you shown Julian the shelter? Let him see your work firsthand. Why would he want to see that? Natalie asked. Because Catherine said firmly, if this marriage is going to convince anyone, you both need to understand what matters to the other person. Julian, you'll spend a day at Safe Haven House next week. Natalie, you'll shadow Julian at his office. Grandmother, Julian protested. Not a request. Catherine's tone left no room for argument. Julian arrived at Safe Haven House the following Tuesday, looking completely out of place in his designer suit among the worn furniture and scuffed floors. Natalie had to admit she enjoyed his discomfort. This is our main common area, she explained, leading him through. Families can cook here. Kids do homework. We have counselors available, job training sessions twice a week. Julian watched a young woman help her daughter with math homework. Another man practiced interview skills with a volunteer. Children played with donated toys in the corner. How many families can you house? Julian asked. Currently, 20 at a time. With the new funding, we can expand to 50, plus increase our day services for families who have housing but need support. They spent the day touring the facility. Julian met families, listened to their stories, saw the genuine impact of Natalie's work. He spoke with Maria, whose eyes filled with gratitude when she talked about finally having a home for her children. As they left that evening, Julian was quiet. What are you thinking? Natalie asked. That I had no idea, Julian said honestly. I write checks to charities all the time, but I never really understood what the money does. These are real people rebuilding their lives. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Natalie said. It's money matters, but it's what you do with it that counts. The next day, Natalie shadowed Julian at Harrington Enterprises. She expected him to be demanding and cold with his employees, but she was surprised. He knew everyone's names, asked about their families, listened carefully to their input. In a meeting about a new development project, she watched him negotiate with fierce intelligence. But when a junior architect presented concerns about displacing local businesses, Julian actually listened. What if we redesigned the ground floor to include affordable retail space? Julian suggested. Keep some of the original businesses, maintain the neighborhood character. The team looked shocked. That was not typical Julian behavior. It's a good compromise, he explained, his eyes flicking to Natalie. Sometimes profit can't be the only consideration. 3 weeks into their arrangement, disaster struck. A fire broke out at Safe Haven House in the middle of the night. No one was hurt, but the damage was extensive. The building would be uninhabitable for months. Natalie stood outside at 3 a.m. watching firefighters douse the last flames, feeling her world collapse. 20 families had nowhere to go. The shelter was gone. Julian arrived within 30 minutes of her frantic call, still in pajamas under his coat. He took one look at the situation and pulled out his phone. "I need hotel rooms for 20 families," he told someone. "Yes, right now. Extended stay suites. Bill everything to my personal account." Natalie stared at him through her tears. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," Julian said simply. "In the morning, we'll find temporary space. I have a warehouse property that can be converted quickly. Right? But tonight, everyone needs a safe place to sleep." He worked through the night, coordinating with his staff, arranging transportation, making sure every family had a room. Natalie watched him transform into someone she hadn't known existed, someone who cared deeply and acted decisively. As dawn broke, they sat together on the curb, exhausted. "Thank you," Natalie said softly. "I don't know how I would have handled this alone." "You're not alone," Julian replied. Then, as if realizing what he had said, he added quickly, "I mean, we're in this arrangement together. Your problems are my problems, at least for appearances." But they both knew that wasn't quite true anymore. Over the following weeks, something fundamental shifted. Julian threw himself into helping rebuild the shelter, not for publicity, but because he genuinely wanted to help. He reviewed architectural plans, expedited permits, used his connections to speed up construction. Natalie found herself looking forward to coming home to the penthouse, to their conversations over dinner, to the way Julian listened when she talked about her day. He made her laugh with his dry wit. He asked thoughtful questions about her work. One evening, they sat on the terrace watching the sunset. "This is not so terrible," Natalie admitted. "This whole arrangement, you're not as awful as I first thought." Julian smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "You're not so bad yourself. For someone who throws rocks at cars, I'll never live that down, will I?" "Never," Julian confirmed. "But I'm starting to think I deserved it." They sat in comfortable silence, their shoulders almost touching. The city lights began to twinkle below. Somewhere in the past weeks, the line between pretending and reality had blurred. The truth came out at Sunday brunch 2 months into the marriage. Catherine watched Julian and Natalie arrive together, laughing at some private joke, his hand naturally finding hers. "I have a confession," Catherine said as they sat down. "The will does not actually require Julian to be married." "What?" Julian set down his coffee cup hard. "There is a clause about partnership and stability, but it's deliberately vague." "I may have exaggerated the legal requirement." Natalie felt her stomach drop. So this whole arrangement was unnecessary. "Not unnecessary," Catherine said calmly. "Essential. Look at yourselves. Julian, you're more grounded, more aware of the world beyond your boardroom. Natalie, you have resources to help more people than you dreamed possible. And unless I'm mistaken, you have both found something neither of you knew you needed. Grandmother," Julian's voice was dangerous, "you manipulated us." "I gave you a push," Catherine corrected. "What you did with it was entirely your choice. Tell me honestly, would either of you change what has happened?" Julian and Natalie looked at each other, and that look was everything that had developed between them. The late-night conversations, the shared laughter, the way Julian had held her when the shelter burned, the way Natalie challenged him to be better, the growing realization that what had started as pretense had become something terrifyingly real. That night, back at the penthouse, they finally talked. Really talked, without the shield of their arrangement or the pretense of their roles. "I should be furious about my grandmother's manipulation," Julian said, "but I'm not. These past 2 months, getting to know you, working together on the shelter, it's been the best time of my life." Natalie's heart raced. "I fell in love with you," she admitted. "I didn't mean to. I fought against it. But somewhere between hating you and pretending to love you, it became real. Julian crossed the room and took her hands. I love you too. I think I started falling that first day when you had the courage to stand up to me. Everyone else in my life treats me with fear or greed. You treated me like a regular person who made a mistake. So what do we do now? Natalie asked. Our arrangement was for 1 year. We start over, Julian said. No arrangement, no contract. It's just us. I want to date you properly, court you, earn your love honestly. You already have my love, Natalie smiled. But I wouldn't mind the courting part. Their first real kiss was nothing like the perfunctory ones they had shared for cameras. It was tender and passionate, full of promise and possibility. 6 months later, they stood in the same spot where Natalie had thrown the rock at Julian's car. The newly rebuilt and expanded safe haven house stood behind them, gleaming and modern, capable of housing 50 families with comprehensive support services. The dedication ceremony had just ended. Keterin stood nearby, looking satisfied with herself. I can't believe this is where it all started, Natalie said, looking at the spot that had changed her life. Best rock I ever had thrown at me, Julian replied, pulling her close. You know the arrangement is officially over next month. Natalie looked up at him. We could end this. Julian pulled a ring box from his pocket. Different ring, he said. Not a family heirloom or a prop. Just a ring I chose because it reminded me of you. Strong, beautiful, enduring. Natalie Morgan, will you marry me? For real this time? Through happy tears, Natalie said yes. Their second wedding was nothing like the first businesslike courthouse ceremony. This time surrounded by families from the shelter, Julian's employees who had become friends, and Catherine beaming in the front row, they promised themselves to each other with genuine love. As they danced at the reception, Natalie whispered, You know I should probably apologize to your car. Julian laughed. That car brought us together. I should give it a medal. They had started with a collision, an angry moment on a city street. They had been forced together by an old woman's scheming and their own desperate needs. But somewhere along the way, the fake marriage had become the realest thing in both their lives. Sometimes the best love stories start with the wrong reasons and find their way to the right ones. Sometimes a thrown rock can shatter more than a car door. It can break through walls people build around their hearts. And sometimes, just sometimes, an apology can lead to so much more than anyone ever imagined. Thanks for watching. See you next time.